wisdom and experience. We're just going to ask you a couple questions about your perspective on Ronald Reagan and Eureka College. And if we have time at the end, we'll take some questions from the audience. All right, let's start. So why did you choose to produce a movie about Ronald Reagan?
Great question. Nobody was doing it in Hollywood. It was I kept waiting for somebody else to do it. I'm kind of a lazy person. If somebody else will do it, I can just let them do it. But nobody was doing it. And then they would occasionally threaten to make one, and then it would get sidetracked. You all know Will Ferrell, the comedian. So he announced he was going to make a movie on Ronald Reagan. Ha ha ha. The whole idea was Reagan had Alzheimer's as president, and the only thing to give it a function was to pretend he was the president in the Alzheimer's state. Some kind of a weird black comedy. And they announced this, and 2 days later, the outpouring of anger from America was so ferocious that poor Will Ferrell canceled the entire thing and walked away from it. That was one example of sort of bad versions of that were about to be made. But other than that, I think Hollywood just didn't know how to approach Ronald Reagan. And so I kept waiting for someone to make it, nobody did, so I finally decided that I should do it. I begin the book, the trigger for me was, some of you heard the story, those of you who were at Dixon. I was driving to my cousin's wedding, right here, who's here tonight, and I was pulled over for speeding. And just to set the stage, I have spent in my life, but on this particular day, I had 3 little girls at the age of 6 and my wife were in a minivan driving through Illinois. And I was pulled for speeding, and the officer said, "You are so far over the speed limit that you have to appear in court in person." And I looked at the ticket and it said, "In Dixon, Illinois." I was driving to Dixon, Illinois, and I pulled over for speeding. So now I've got to appear in court in Dixon. And I have a day to kill in Dixon, and so that was kind of the beginning of it. I paid my $500 fine, and but that's, I have to thank the officer for pulling me over, because that was the beginning. But the reason that inspired me was to walk around Dixon and even parts of this area. You see that greatness in America comes from normal places. Ordinary places give birth to great people, and it's a testament to the people in that area, of course, to Eureka College, but just the character of America. And you think about it, most of our presidents do come from ordinary families and ordinary places. So I have to thank Dixon and the officer for getting this movie started.
Thank you, it seemed like fate.
Alright, please share from your research, what area of Eureka College had the greatest impact on the president?
Well, I hope you noticed the Eureka line I put in the movie, because he's in one of his cabinet meetings, and all these Harvard or Yale types are kind of, giving their economic philosophies, and Reagan says, "Well, I went to Eureka College. It wasn't one of those Ivy League schools, but I learned I was an economics major." So that was my Eureka shout out to you all. But I think he enjoyed the fact that he had gone to a non-Ivy League, allegedly prestigious school, but that he had the wisdom of the heartland that he acquired at Eureka as an economics major. So I think he really enjoyed tweaking his Harvard and Yale types in his social circles.
So on that topic, what is your favorite Eureka Reagan moment?
Well, I think it would be the efforts that he led with the strike and the student activism that he showed at a young age. Really, if I had enough time, I would have liked to have included that in the film. We just didn't have enough time. But that already shows his impulses that he had. I think also the fact that Eureka was so instrumental early on in recognizing the problems of race is a huge thing as well, both denominationally and as a college, that was really important. And also we learned early on that the church that they attended was a very integrated church at that early stage, which is really unusual as well. And I learned that after the film we already shot most of the film. And so I realized after we shot the film, we've got to show that. And so I called upon, you all probably don't know her, but one of my dearest friends is a Motown legend named Blinky Williams. She had a hit back in the 60s and 70s. So I said, "Blinky," she's like 80 years old. I need to call upon you to come and stand in front of a green screen. I'm going to integrate this church after we've already shot the movie. So when Reagan is baptized, there's my friend Linky Williams in the shot to show what a future forward-looking church as well as denomination that you guys are a part of here.
And how did the Eureka experience impact the president's leadership style?
Yeah, I think that was that moment I talked about earlier was a pivotal moment for him. Was he school president or class president? Does anybody recall? I think he was.
Yep.
So I told them, where's our current president?
Right there.
No pressure or anything, but we're expecting you to follow that same trajectory. So we'll check in about 20 years and see how you're doing. Yeah, I think that student activism really showed him that change was possible, that he had to, he had to marshal the resources of his friends, and they made real change. I forgot the exact issue was. What was the issue again? That they were, anyway.
A few things. It was, so it was about tuition around those things, and then there were also some things around the war.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and he came here, I believe his brother, Moon, helped to get him into Eureka too. So, but yeah, I think that gave him that sense that, he had, his mother had really, he and his mother would often tour churches and recite Bible verses and poetry. So he already had that ability to speak well, but that really connected the dots for him to how to be, in a way, a social activist in his own way.
So do you think he would have been the same type of leader had he not attended Eureka College?
It's a great question. I think he would have missed out on that sense of the heartland, the sensibilities of the heartland. He never lost that. Even though he went on to be in social circles in Washington and Hollywood, he never lost that touch of the common man. A lot of politicians, not to pick on any particular ones, but a lot of politicians don't have that sense of the average common person. You can kind of tell when a politician doesn't like people, and can't wait to get out of the room, versus politicians that really love people. You can tell they love people. One story that I heard early on, I spent time with probably 50 or 55 of Reagan's aides along the way, Supreme Court justices, his son Michael. But one of them, Congressman Dana Rohrabacher, told me that Reagan was always the same with, in or out of the group. He wouldn't leave them and go, oh, so glad that meeting's over, those guys are crazy. He was the same person. He wasn't two-faced in that way. And so I think he really loved people, and that comes from, I think, the heartland and places like Eureka.
I am deeply impacted by the president's legacy as a Reagan Fellow myself. Why do you think he chose to create this scholarship at Eureka College?
He was, Mike Reagan told me an interesting story. He really wanted to give opportunities to people that didn't have opportunities. Now, this bit for Michael didn't work out well for him because Mike had gotten a scholarship. I think it was Arizona. Does anybody remember this story, John? I think it was Arizona State. He had gotten a scholarship to play football. And Reagan called the school and said, my son doesn't need that scholarship, give it to somebody else. And Mike's like, Dad, what are you doing? You threw my scholarship away. He said, well, we don't need it. Let's give it to some kid that needs it. And that was really, poor Mike, he played football because of that. But that shows you his attitude. He says, look, I'm the governor, we're a privileged family, we don't need that. Give it to someone that really needs it. That was his outlook toward people. And I think you saw that in that story for Mike. By the way, I have to tell you a quick story of Mike. Mike passed away 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was at his funeral and everything. But in the movie, if you kind of noticed, how do I say this politely? Mike's mother, Reagan's first wife, does not come across as the nicest human being on the planet in our movie. And I was sort of dreading Mike coming to the premiere, because nobody wants to see your own mother, treated a little roughly like we had to, because that's the way she was. So anyway, we had our premiere at the Chinese Theater, and I'm just dreading Mike calling me and saying, how dare you treat my mom like that, make her have to be such a snob. Well, he texted me and he said, yeah, you pretty much nailed her, good job. So I just thought, but to illustrate that, he said one day, President Reagan had given a speech, and Mike called his mother, You know, I said, Mom, did you see that? Didn't Dad do a great job? And he said, Jane Wyman said, Mike, I didn't like those speeches for years, and I don't like them now. But she did vote for him twice, but she wasn't a fan. She was the Republican, and he was the Democrat back then, by the way, when they were married. So they switched, they did switch places, but I guess he came along to her point of view eventually. But, so she was an admirer from afar, just didn't want to be married to him, and didn't want to be a political wife.
So Reagan had 4 different careers in media, politics, and on to become president. So how do you think Eureka College prepared him for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. He really did have, you're exactly right. He had 4 almost different careers. Yeah, I think the Disciples of Christ influence, his mother, the pastor of the church he grew up in, and Eureka. That's really those 4 key elements are really what shaped him in that along the way. And the economics major part is interesting because you don't think of him necessarily in that way, but you know, what came to be known as Reaganomics, I think part of that was formed at Eureka with his economics professors that he learned from. So it's really all those influences, I think, that together. The spiritual foundation was definitely, his mother realized that she had to do something because he finds his dad drunk in the snow, as you know from the movie. And so she gave him that book, that printer of Udell's. And so you see that really strong Disciples of Christ influence that, of course, leads into Eureka later.
While at the college, the president was a championship swimmer, an okay football player, and a sports announcer after college. How do you think sports impacted his leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of course, swimming, football. Well, you know, you saw that, I hope you saw that scene in the film with the 2 African-American teammates of his. It was really one, Bergie, and the event that happened where they wouldn't let the players stay at the hotel. And so Reagan brings them back to his home. And, you know, in some sense, there was a bit of naivete because Reagan didn't, and Bergie, the African-American football player, his teammate, later said, in our circles, we didn't even think about racism a whole lot because he was my best friend. We were best friends, and that was Reagan's real first look at what was the injustice that was happening around him when his, and by the way, Reagan's father experienced that, a similar situation when a hotel wouldn't have been a Jewish person either. So you can see the parallels there. So I think that event was really important in shaping his ideas on that. Bergie was a lifelong friend of Reagan's, and he died about 6 months after Reagan was elected president. He got to see his best friend and teammate be elected president. So I think that was really an important moment in shaping him.
I asked you earlier what your favorite Reagan Eureka moment was, but what was your favorite Reagan moment?
You mean just in general, or in the
general.
movie in general? Wow, that's a tough one. You know, I just heard so many great stories from all the people that knew him over the years, and I'm trying to think here. One of the fun stories that I heard, by the way, John Morris really unlocked a Reagan conundrum, which was his senior yearbook quote, and his senior yearbook, right, John? I can't explain the whole thing, John, but the bottom line is that it's a quote that's very obscure. What is it, John? Can you remember?
I can't quote
Yeah, anyway, it's a very obscure quote, and I think everybody just kind of looked at it and said, huh? But John actually went and found the poem that it came from, and it was a long poem that Reagan just took a snippet of. It's almost like he wanted you to go and find it, and John's the guy that found it. But the whole idea is that a solitary man is never alone because God is always with him, and you can always communicate to God, so you're never alone, basically. And so I thank John for finding that. But I think Reagan was very much like that. If you go to his home, how many of you have been to the ranch in California? I'm pretty sure after Reagan, I've learned that people, we buy houses that reflect our personalities. And this house, to get to it, you have to drive here and there and this curve and that curve, and then you finally get there after like 45 minutes. And it's really like Reagan. he's hard, he makes it intentionally hard to discover him. When you get there, it's like, oh, okay, I get it now. And that poem is an example of that. But yeah, just so many great stories. Probably I don't think we put this in the movie, but Justice Kennedy, I visited him at the Supreme Court, and he was Reagan's lawyer when he was governor, and he told me a fun story. He said one day, Charlton Heston and Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne, I think it was, three of them came to visit Governor Reagan because Reagan was going to cut funding for the arts for children from 15 million to 10 million. Classic, kind of Republican move, to cut the arts, right? So these three guys, I guess they figured we'll send the three conservative guys to tell Governor Reagan you can't cut funding for the arts for children. So they come in and they gave him a long, impassioned speech about why the arts are important and why the children have to have the arts. And Reagan and Kennedy was in the room, and he said, Reagan listened very intently, and he said, fellas, you're right. I'm going to cut that to 0, and then let's go raise it from the private sector. Classic move, classic Reagan move. And the three guys, and Kennedy said it was the worst lobbying effort in the history of lobbying, because they got the 10 to 0. But the point was that Reagan loved the arts, loved children. He just didn't want the government to be involved in it, and so the three of them raised it from the private sector. And that kind of shows you Reagan's philosophy. It's not that he didn't like certain views, but he just wanted it to be done in a non-governmental way. And so that was the other Kennedy story told me, he said Reagan called him to be on the Supreme Court. And Kennedy did not want to be in the Supreme Court. He wanted to stay in California. And so he said, Governor, I said, Mr. President, my wife and I don't know anybody in Washington, D.C. We just can't do it. And he said, Reagan paused and he said, well, you know me. And he said, okay, Mr. President. So he agreed to come and be on the Supreme Court.
What are some of the enduring lessons from Reagan's life that Reagan Fellows at Eureka College can learn?
Yeah, I think be open to new information. A lot of his ideas he came to rather later in life. So he wasn't closed-minded. He was firm in his convictions, but he was always open to learning new things. For instance, as we talked about Reaganomics, he didn't figure that out until 1978, basically. He switched political parties, so he was not an inflexible person. He was open to new information. So that when you think of Ronald Reagan and tax cuts, he was almost 70 years old when he came to that idea, when he embraced that idea that became what you consider Reaganomics. And so I think it's a combination of having firm beliefs and yet being open to new information, being willing to adjust those beliefs as you get new information.
So going from that, he was president before any current Eureka College students were born. So I was born in 2005. So what can we draw from his Eureka story?
Yeah, I think it's to bring the values of the heartland into new and social circles, whether it's in New York or California or wherever, Los Angeles, Hollywood, New York. Never forget your values and learn how to integrate them into those. If your trajectory is in the upper echelons of society, don't leave your heartland behind. Those places need the values of the heartland. Trust me, I live in those places, and they need the values that you are learning at Eureka. And so I think he did a good job of integrating those, that he could be in those circles and be in those events, but he still kept the values of this area of Illinois, and of Dixon and Tampico and Eureka.
Eureka College is affiliated with the Christian Church through the Disciples of Christ denomination, and his mother was a strong believer. What role do you believe attending a Disciples College had in his journey of faith and leadership?
Yeah, she was. She almost died in the influenza outbreak of 1919, I think it was. And so she was influenced by a lot of radio preachers in those days. And so she made a vow to God that if he would save her life, that she would really serve him. And so I think she really, that really changed her trajectory of her life. She was very she was very committed to social work. She would visit prisons, and she was the person that you would turn to in the community. If your son or child is sick, you would go to Mrs. Reagan and she would pray for your child, and that kind of a thing. Not like a faith healer, but just like the woman that you would turn to in your moments of crisis, and she was always helping people. Even when President Reagan, when she went to California with Reagan and lived out there, she would still visit prisons and hospitals, and she would have a visitation. So I think that's part of the spirit of the denomination. I know it may have changed over the years, but at its core, that denomination and Eureka, I think, is a combination of the kind of Methodism where you want to do good, but also have strong core beliefs. So it's not one or the other. It's not like you just have beliefs that never get acted out, but it was really putting those beliefs into action. So I think that she was, I don't know exactly which radio preacher, but I'm guessing it was probably Disciples of Christ types that influenced her a lot, as well as the pastor at the church that they attended. Paul, by the way, Paul Kengor, who was here last year, you all remember Paul. The reason that I really liked his books were, Reagan's own biographer was named Edmund Morris, and some of you may have his book, but Edmund Morris was a respected historian, wrote the main biography of Teddy Roosevelt, came to do Reagan's, and he finally threw up his hands and kind of gave up and said, I just can't figure the guy out. He called Reagan inscrutable, and wrote a kind of a goofy, half fiction, half real book that everyone's kind of confused by, called Dutch. But in the middle of that context of, as I said, he's being hard to figure out, Paul Kengor really did a service. Paul told me that he visited the church Reagan grew up in, maybe you all know the church in town in Dixon, and he said to the pastor, is there anybody that can hear or see the sermons that young Ronald Reagan heard as a child? And the current pastor said, yes, they're in the basement in a box, and nobody has ever asked to see them before. You can go look at them. All the genius biographers, and nobody had bothered to see what was young Ronald Reagan hearing as a child. And surprise, surprise, a lot of anti-communist sermons from the pastor. Oh, everything makes sense now. He's being fed a lot of information at the time, after the Bolshevik Revolution, that communism is a problem and is a threat to America, and those ideas, take root and grow. So again, you see the connection between the heartland, a pastor who was very, very aware of the dangers of communism, and imparted that to his protege, who then grew up and kind of implemented those things.
So finally, when you think of Eureka College today, why do you think it is important to uphold, support, and engage with it?
Yeah, think of a professor, an economic professor. You don't know that you don't have a Ronald Reagan in your class, or his mother, a parent, a pastor, a teacher. And so you may very well have the next Ronald Reagan in your class. And so I think when you think of it that way, from the president on down to the janitor, it gives you a real sense of responsibility that you have those kinds of people in your midst. But you don't know it at the time. You won't know it. Maybe in your lifetime you won't know it. But it's really important that you keep planting those seeds, because you don't know who is in your midst. And so if you remember it that way, I think it'll really give you a sense of mission and purpose in all the jobs that are on campus.
Thank you. Let's give Mark a hand before we take some questions.